In an age carved from the echoes of forgotten gods and restless seas, the ancient world trembled beneath the shadow of a single act of love and betrayal, for it was said that no kingdom, no warrior, no prophecy could ever have predicted how the elopement of Helen, Queen of Sparta, and the woman whose beauty poets claimed could bend the heavens would ignite a war so monumental that the earth itself would remember it for thousands of years. Yet the story did not begin with armies clashing or swords trembling in the hands of mighty heroes, but with a quiet moment beneath the marble columns of Sparta, where Helen, torn between duty and desire, found herself falling under the spell of Paris, Prince of Troy, whose charm, youth, and bold heart tempted her away from the life she had always known, giving rise to a scandal that shook the world when she fled across the Aegean Sea with him, leaving behind her furious husband, King Menelaus, who stormed through the halls of his palace with a rage so fierce it seemed the walls would crack. But Menelaus was not a man to suffer humiliation in silence, and with flames in his eyes he summoned his brother Agamemnon, King of Kings, and together they called upon every oath-bound ruler in Greece, every warrior of legend, every leader whose sword gleamed with the promise of glory, pulling into their cause Achilles, the unmatched demigod whose very presence made armies tremble, Odysseus, the cunning mastermind whose mind was sharper than any blade, Ajax, the towering giant whose strength seemed forged from the bones of mountains, Nestor, the wise old strategist whose voice carried the weight of centuries, and countless others who answered the call not only for honor, but for destiny, for the name of Helen and the insult of Paris traveled swiftly across kingdoms, growing louder until the Greeks stood united, their ships over 1,000 rising like a forest of masts upon the horizon, carrying an army so immense the sea groaned beneath it. And as they sailed toward Troy, the winds howling like wolves, the gods above watched with amusement, fury, and fascination, for Mount Olympus itself was divided, with Hera and Athena swearing vengeance against Paris for choosing Aphrodite as the fairest goddess, while Aphrodite shielded him with divine affection, knowing she herself was responsible for the spark that would engulf nations in fire. And so the great Greek fleet reached the shores of Troy, where the golden city rose high above the plain, its walls towering like the edges of a sacred world, unbreakable, impenetrable, designed by the hands of the gods themselves. And as the Greeks stormed the beaches with roaring battle cries, the Trojans rushed out to meet them. Hector, the noble prince whose courage made him the heart of Troy, Aeneas, the chosen survivor of fate, Sarpedon, the mighty Lycian king, and countless warriors whose blood soon stained the earth, marking the beginning of a war that would stretch for 10 long, merciless years, a war fought not only with swords but with pride, prophecy, vengeance, and the cruelty of immortal forces who toyed with mortal lives like pieces on a celestial chessboard. And as the seasons turned and the corpses of heroes fed the hungry soil, the war evolved into a cycle of endless duels, raids, truces, and betrayals, with each passing year etching deeper scars upon both nations. For though the Greeks built camps stretching miles across the coast and launched countless assaults upon the Trojan gates, the walls remained untouched, defying every attempt to breach them, and while skirmishes raged across the plains, rivalries within the Greek ranks burned with equal heat. Achilles, proud and unmatched, clashed often with Agamemnon, whose hunger for power blinded him to the fragile unity of his army, until at last their feud reached such bitterness that Achilles withdrew from battle entirely, retreating to his tent while the Greeks suffered devastating losses without their greatest warrior, prompting the Trojans, newly empowered, to surge forward like a rising storm, pushing the Greeks back to the very edges of their ships, and at the forefront of this Trojan fury stood Hector, Prince of Troy, whose sword flashed like lightning as he carved through the battlefield, inspiring his men and terrifying his enemies, for he believed not in glory but in duty to his father, King Priam, to his wife, Andromache, to his infant son who awaited him in the high towers of their besieged city, and it was this sense of responsibility that made him the soul of Troy, the warrior whose presence decided whether the Trojans advanced or fell. But even as he triumphed, the gods continued to interfere, sometimes aiding him, sometimes hindering him, for Zeus manipulated the fates like strings of a grand tapestry, allowing the war to flow ever closer to the doom foretold by prophets and seers, while Athena whispered strategies into the minds of Greek warriors, and Apollo protected the Trojans with radiant fury, especially Paris, whose arrows flew with divine precision whenever the god stood at his back, and amidst this chaos, the Greek warrior Patroclus, Achilles' beloved friend, could no longer watch the suffering of his comrades, and so he donned Achilles' armor in a desperate attempt to rally the Greeks, riding into battle like a blazing comet, striking fear into Trojan hearts who believed Achilles himself had returned. But though Patroclus fought with unmatched valor, fate tightened its grip when Hector confronted him, unaware of the impersonation, and after a brutal duel, Hector struck him down, only realizing the truth when he removed the helmet and saw not Achilles' wrathful face but the gentle, fading eyes of Patroclus, a revelation that shook him even as the battlefield swallowed his guilt. Yet what he did not know was that this single act, this moment where one hero fell by the hand of another, would unleash a storm more terrible than any siege engine or army, for when the news reached Achilles, his grief erupted into a monstrous tempest of sorrow and rage, and the man who once withdrew from war now burned with purpose, rising from his tent like a spirit of vengeance, his screams echoing across the sea, summoning Greek warriors to witness the awakening of their deadliest champion as he swore an oath before. For despite moments of mercy that softened the edges of war, the Greeks remained trapped in a stalemate that neither strength nor courage alone could break, for the walls of Troy still loomed untouchable, and though Achilles' wrath had changed the tides of battle, it could not alter destiny's deeper weaving, which soon tightened again when Paris, guided by Apollo's unseen hand, shot an arrow that struck Achilles in the heel, the one place his immortal mother Thetis could not protect, causing the mighty warrior to fall, his death sending shockwaves through the Greek ranks and leaving them shaken, leaderless, and uncertain. Yet even Achilles' passing did not end their resolve, for the Greeks, fueled now not only by vengeance for Helen but by the blood of their fallen heroes, pressed onward with renewed desperation, cycling through leaders who each contributed different strengths: Ajax's raw power, Odysseus' unmatched cunning, Agamemnon's authority, Menelaus' fierce determination. But the walls refused to yield, and Troy, though grieving, held firm under the leadership of Aeneas, Glaucus, Deiphobus, and other resilient warriors who refused to surrender their homeland to foreign invaders, and thus the years dragged on until hope itself seemed to wither, leaving both sides exhausted, battered, and weary of a war that had consumed generations. Yet from the ashes of frustration rose a spark of brilliance when Odysseus, the master of strategy whose mind danced between shadows, conceived an idea so daring, so audacious, so unpredictable that it would be remembered long after kings and empires vanished into dust, a plan that rejected brute force in favor of deception, requiring not only craftsmanship but the ability to manipulate belief itself, for he proposed building a monumental wooden horse as a false offering to the gods, pretending to abandon the war entirely and sail away, while hiding a carefully chosen band of elite warriors inside the hollow structure, turning the gift into a secret weapon that would bypass Troy's impenetrable defenses. And so the Greeks set to work, sawing, carving, and shaping wood into a creature so towering and majestic that it seemed almost divine, while the rest of the army boarded their ships and sailed out of sight, hiding behind a distant island as night approached and silence settled upon the abandoned shoreline like a shroud. And when dawn warmed the sky, the Trojans emerged cautiously from their gates, marveling at the colossal horse left behind, its presence stirring a fierce debate within their council. Laocoon, the priest, warned that the horse was a trap, crying out that even gifts from Greeks should be feared, while others argued that it must be a sacred token marking the Greeks' surrender, and still others, swayed by the trickery of Athena who clouded their judgment, urged that the horse be brought inside the city as a celebration of victory. And when Laocoon was suddenly attacked and killed by monstrous serpents rising from the sea, a punishment engineered by the gods to silence his wisdom, the Trojans took it as a sign that the horse was indeed holy, and in their triumph they dragged the massive structure through the gates, cheering. And long after the flames of Troy dimmed into embers scattered by the mournful winds that swept the ruins, the echoes of the city's fall rippled outward across the ancient world, carried by sailors, merchants, poets, and exiles who told and retold the tale with trembling voices, for the destruction of such a mighty kingdom was not merely an ending but the beginning of countless new destinies, each woven into the tapestry of fate by the unseen hands of gods who still watched from the star-crowned heights of Olympus, amused by the tragedies they allowed and the triumphs they denied. And as the surviving Trojans fled through secret passages guided by Aeneas, who bore upon his shoulders both his aged father and the heavy burden of a future empire, he felt the weight of divine expectation pressing upon his heart, for Aphrodite whispered that his line would one day give rise to nations more powerful than the shattered kingdom he now abandoned, and though grief threatened to crush him, he pressed onward through burning forests, across ravaged fields, toward distant shores where the seeds of Rome's legacy would be planted. Yet even as Troy's survivors scattered like ashes on the wind, the Greeks themselves were not granted the victory they imagined, for each ship that sailed homeward carried not only stolen treasures and memories soaked in blood but also curses, prophecies, and the restless attention of gods who had grown weary of mortal arrogance, and thus the journey home became its own epic, beginning with Menelaus wandering for years across storm-tossed seas in search of forgiveness from the gods he had offended, while Agamemnon returned to a palace poisoned by betrayal and met a fate as dark as the sins he committed during the war. And Ajax, once a towering symbol of strength, fell into madness and perished, undone by pride and divine punishment, leaving only Odysseus to navigate the labyrinth of challenges set before him by Poseidon, whose wrath churned the ocean into a realm of monsters, enchantresses, and illusions designed to break the cunning hero's spirit as he drifted from island to island, clinging to hope that he would one day see his homeland Ithaca and the faithful Penelope who waited for him with a patience unmatched by any mortal. And while the Greek world fractured under the weight of its own victories, the gods observed with a mixture of boredom, amusement, and regret, for they knew that the war they had encouraged, stoked by jealousy, vanity, and desires both divine and mortal, had reshaped the destiny of an entire age, scattering heroes like seeds whose legacies would bloom in future generations, etched into the minds of poets who transformed suffering into story, turning the bitterness of war into immortal tales that would outlive the gods themselves, resonating across centuries as reminders that power is fleeting, beauty is dangerous, pride is fatal, and even the strongest walls can fall when struck not by force but by deception. And so the memory of Troy remained alive not only in the ruins left behind or the ashes carried by the wind, but in the hearts of those who understood that the wooden horse, symbol of triumph and tragedy, was not merely an instrument of war but a reflection of human ambition, ingenuity, and the fragile balance between wisdom and folly, reminding all who heard the tale that a single choice, a single passion, a single moment of weakness or courage could reshape the world. For just as Helen's love had ignited the greatest conflict of her age, and just as Achilles' rage had shaken the foundations of nations, and just as Odysseus' mind had conceived a plan that toppled an empire believed to be invincible, so too would future generations learn that history is not forged solely by kings or armies but by the emotions that govern the human soul: love, jealousy, pride, loyalty, grief, each more powerful than any blade forged in mortal fire. And thus the story of Troy, though born in an age long buried beneath the sands of time, continued to live, breathe, and evolve in every retelling, every poem, every whisper that carried its legacy forward, proving that even when stone collapses and empires fade, stories remain eternal, immortal flames that refuse to be extinguished. And as the smoke of Troy's destruction mingled with the dawn, the horizon glowed with a terrible beauty, for fire and blood had painted the city in hues of sorrow and glory alike, while survivors stumbled through streets littered with the remnants of their homes, temples, and marketplaces, their faces etched with despair, grief, and disbelief. And yet even in this devastation, the faint whisper of hope persisted, carried by those like Aeneas who, guided by divine purpose, gathered the remnants of Troy's people, forming ragged columns that moved through the desolation with heavy hearts but unbroken spirit, for they knew that though their city had fallen, their lineage, culture, and honor must endure, and as they walked, each step became a testament to resilience, every cry for the fallen became a vow to remember, and every glance back at smoldering walls reinforced the understanding that life, even after catastrophe, demanded courage, ingenuity, and unyielding determination. Meanwhile, across the seas, the Greek forces returned victorious yet hollow, carrying treasures of gold, captured women, and the bitter memories of friends and kin lost to war. For triumph had proven far more costly than any mortal had imagined, and even the gods watched silently, some approving, some disappointed, some perhaps regretful, for the mortality they toyed with had created consequences beyond their foresight, and the surviving Greeks dispersed to their homelands, each bearing the weight of stories that would shape future legends. Menelaus, eventually reunited with Helen, tempered by suffering and lessons of pride; Agamemnon, meeting his own dark fate at the hands of those closest to him, reflecting that even kings could not escape the tangled threads of vengeance; Odysseus, whose journey home would span 10 years of trials, temptations, and challenges, a voyage that would test his mind, spirit, and heart, forging him into a hero whose cunning and patience would become the stuff of legend, and Achilles, though fallen, immortalized not only through the songs of bards but in the collective memory of warriors and poets alike, a symbol of wrath, glory, and the tragic consequences of pride and loss. And as the years passed, the story of Troy, once a living city of ambition and human drama, transformed into myth and memory, a cautionary tale whispered across campfires, sung in courts, etched upon stone tablets, and woven into the very fabric of cultural consciousness, for the tale encapsulated the extremes of human experience: love and betrayal, courage and fear, ingenuity and folly, honor and revenge, mortality and divine intervention. And through this story, generations learned that the fate of nations could hinge upon the smallest choices, the simplest desires, the single acts of courage or weakness, and that while walls could be built to resist armies, nothing could withstand deception, passion, or the relentless tides of destiny. And thus the wooden horse remained forever emblematic of the cunning that could outwit strength, the subtle forces that could overturn empires, and the truths that endure long after swords have dulled, blood has dried, and the names of kings, queens, and heroes drift into eternity. For as long as mortals lived, they would tell the story of Troy, shaping it anew with every voice, every imagination, every heart that dared to remember, ensuring that the saga of a city that rose to greatness and fell to trickery would never truly end, that the lessons of the past would echo forever, and that the intertwined fates of gods and men would continue to captivate, inspire, and warn those who sought to understand the delicate, fierce, an eternal dance of ambition, love, vengeance, and destiny. And as the smoke settled and the cries of the fallen faded into a solemn silence, the surviving Trojans moved like shadows across the ruined city, their faces streaked with ash and tears, their hearts heavy with loss yet burning with the unquenchable fire of survival. For each step forward became a declaration that the spirit of Troy would endure, even as they carried the memory of loved ones, the lessons of betrayal, and the knowledge that destiny had been shaped as much by mortal choices as by the whims of gods. And in the years that followed, the descendants of Aeneas wandered through distant lands, carrying with them the seeds of civilization, culture, and empire, their stories mingling with local myths, their struggles echoing across mountains, rivers, and seas, until one day they would lay the foundation for Rome, a testament to the idea that even after utter destruction, resilience, courage, and vision could transform tragedy into legacy. While back in Greece, the victors returned with a mix of glory and grief, their homes welcoming them with familiarity but also with the sharp sting of the price of victory. For Menelaus and Helen faced a marriage tempered by suffering, Agamemnon found a throne poisoned by envy and vengeance that would take his life, Odysseus embarked upon the long and perilous voyage of his return to Ithaca, battling storms, monsters, and temptations that tested every fiber of his being, each step forward shaping him into a hero not of mere strength but of cunning, patience, and endurance, while the memories of Achilles' rage, bravery, and ultimate demise became immortalized in song and story, inspiring generations of warriors and rulers. And as bards recited the tale, the gods watched with varying emotions, some amused, some proud, some disappointed, acknowledging that while they had stirred the events with divine influence, it was the passions, decisions, and follies of mortals that truly forged history. And over time, the tale of Troy expanded beyond the battlefield, encompassing love and loss, ambition and hubris, strategy and deceit, honor and vengeance, blending reality and myth into a narrative so vast and compelling that it transcended centuries, shaping literature, theater, philosophy, and art across civilizations, reminding all who heard it that even in the darkest hours, courage, ingenuity, and resilience could endure, that a single moment of choice could shift the fate of nations, that passion could ignite war, and that cunning could conquer strength. And in this eternal echo, the story of the wooden horse, the valor of heroes, the grief of the fallen, the wrath of gods, and the endurance of survivors merged into a timeless lesson about the duality of human nature and the interplay of fate and free will, ensuring that Troy, though physically destroyed, would live forever in the hearts, minds, and imaginations of humanity, a city of legends, a crucible of human emotion, and a reminder that history, though shaped by blood and fire, is ultimately immortalized through the stories we tell, the lessons we learn, and the courage we carry forward into each new generation, so that even as centuries pass and empires rise and fall, the saga of Troy continues to shine as a beacon of heroism, tragedy, and the eternal dance between gods and men, proving that no wall, no army, no fury of heaven or earth can extinguish the enduring power of a story well told, and thus the echoes of Troy, the screams, the tears, the triumphs, the betrayals, the love, the wrath, the courage, the cunning, the grief, and the hope resound forever, immortal in memory, immortal in song, immortal in the hearts of all who dare to remember. For as long as humans dream, strive, and tell tales of courage and catastrophe, the city of Troy shall never truly fall, and its legends shall forever illuminate the human spirit with lessons of valor, wisdom, passion, and the inexorable tides of destiny that govern the lives of gods and mortals alike.